Direct from Foxborough, Massachusetts, the gem of Norfolk County, and taped at the studios of Foxborough Cable Access. It's Foxborough Central. And here's your host, Bob Hickey.
And welcome to another fantastic episode of Foxborough Central. I am Bob Hickey, your host, thanking you for taking a little bit of time to join with me and my guests as we talk about the people, events, and organizations that make Foxborough truly the gem of Norfolk County. And my guest today, part of that whole gym thing, is Bob Cutler. Bob, how are you doing today?
Thanks for having me.
Mr. Cutler is our town clerk, has been our town clerk since
2008.
Since
7 years.
2008, and in that time, it has been 7 years, you're
Yeah.
correct. And in that time, has continued our tradition of stability. Marie Crimmins, of course, was in there for many, many moons before you. And the town clerk's role is one of those understated yet, when it comes up, much appreciated positions. And I'll, toss out my little bit of kudos to you.
Appreciate it.
But on top of the role of town clerk, when we recently underwent the transition for town manager, you stepped up and you pulled double duty, and it was truly double duty as our interim town manager until the town was able to successfully hire Bill Keegan, who is a fantastic town manager in my opinion also.
Yeah, he's been doing a good job.
You really carried the ball and made sure that core services weren't dropped. So so much credit to you for doing that. I'm sure the family loved the fact that you're out not only on one full-time job, but two full-time jobs.
It was difficult, but I have great staff, both in the selectman's office and in town clerk's office. So there was a lot of help. Everybody pitched in, and we were all trying to just make it through that period.
Well, I'm a government geek, as you probably know, and I like talking town government in particular because I think Foxborough is a great place, and much of what we do runs on the backs of her volunteers. You're in elected office, and it's a paid position, the town clerk, and it's every 3 years. But since you've been in there for the last 7 years, you've had an opportunity to really grow into the role. So can you just share for maybe 2 minutes of what does a town clerk do anywhere but here in Foxborough?
Okay. It's interesting because people think, all you do is sell dog licenses and you sell birth certificates, but it's a lot bit more complicated than that. One of the main functions, obviously, is elections. So we're very busy right now. We've got the election coming up on May 4th.
People should go out and vote May 4th at the polls open at 7 a.m. I always love saying this. Yeah. 7 a.m. at the Ahern Middle School, and they close at 8 p.m. And I know not only is everybody going to go vote Bob Cutler, our town clerk, but they're also going to tune into this favorite station on Foxborough Cable Access to watch live election results.
Let's hope so, because we want good participation, and so that's one of the main functions.
Okay.
Another one, the very following week, is the town meeting on May 11th, 7:30 at the high school.
The annual town meeting, yes.
Yep. And so the clerk is central in both of those situations. For the elections, we basically set up, run the elections, very capable group of people. I've had the election workers, for the most part, the same ones that were there when I took over 7 years ago.
Your election warden is Kathy Brady?
Kathy Brady, correct. Yeah. Dave Pignato did a great job and was there for many years, and he got me through that first year, which was a presidential election year. So I was very thankful for him to stay there and help us, ease us in the transition.
I think we here in Foxborough maybe unfairly take it for granted. But if you think about it, we've had so little turnover. We've had essentially really good people in these key roles for so long. Marie Crimmins and then you. And there was no gap, there was no learning curve. It was quality service all the way through. With elections, Mr. Pignato, and then picking up from that, Kathy Brady, who had been working for him many, many moons.
Correct.
A decade, prior to that as a volunteer and then as an election worker. So, this is the type of continuity that really spells success, and maybe we in Foxborough take it for granted because you don't read about it. There's nothing sexy about things going well. It's not newspaper fodder. It's just, it's going well. It's going good. So credit to you and the team for doing that. And if nobody else does, I'll shout it out. Thank you for doing all that.
Appreciate that. A lot of the success also goes with the people behind the scenes. Jerry Guzzi was my assistant for many years, but was also the assistant for Marie as well. She was there in the town for 30 years. Donna Fitzgerald was there as the elections clerk, and now I have two tremendous staff, Pam Riccio, my assistant, and Claudine Gover. She's the elections clerk now. So they just picked up, and that's where it all starts. You got to have good people behind you, and I appreciate and thank them every day.
So we have the election coming up on May 4th, and one of the not a warrant article, it's a ballot question.
Correct.
Is for tenure. And I know a lot has been spoken of it, for and against, and I think that when I read any question, I like to get the information before I form an opinion. And I don't know exactly what it is that we're talking about. So
Okay.
here on Foxborough Central, and this is special election coverage, let's talk to Bob Cutler, who is our town clerk, and tell us what is the tenure ballot question at the May 4th election.
So Mass General Law, Chapter 41, Section 19B allows town clerks who have at least 5 years' experience to petition the town to get the question on the ballot.
This is a state statute.
It's a state statute, correct.
It's state law, and this is a process that's outlined, and it's the law.
Correct.
Okay.
So there's three basic provisions, 19B, C, and D, and I'll go through that a little bit with you. But I want to give you a little history about that first. So the clerk in Westwood, Dorothy Powers, she just got tenure last year.
Okay.
And Westwood has a history of getting tenure for their clerks. I think the last 5 clerks all have been tenured. So Dorothy and I are basically on parallel paths, and we've been talking about the issue back and forth, whether tenure makes sense or an appointed clerk makes sense. And she went with that path and was successful last year. So I started thinking about it again this year when Bill Keegan came on, talked to him a little bit about maybe making it appointed. And then he hired Mary Beth Bernard, who was the human resources from Westwood.
Right, and she is our assistant.
She's our
town
assistant,
manager.
yeah.
Yep.
So I started talking with her, and she pushed the idea of tenure again with me. And so that's where it started with me back in February.
Okay.
I spoke to Dorothy about it, and she sent me the information. And I thought I had to the nomination period, March 16th, to gather signatures because the petition requires 5% of the registered voters. Then I realized I had 2 weeks to get the signatures. So I really wasn't trying to make a big deal about it. Hadn't mentioned it to any of the selectmen, hadn't mentioned it to the advisory committee. I was just trying to make sure I got enough signatures to get it on. I was able to secure the signatures, talk to Bill. Bill suggested I go in front of the selectmen just to give them a heads up, and that's where it started.
Okay.
So
And I signed it.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. So it was good. I had a lot of help. It was all around a bunch of different places in town, but a lot of it I did on my own. Every day I tried to get a sheet filled, 32 signatures.
I've gone through the process. I ran for a couple offices myself. Maybe you don't remember.
I do.
Oh, you do? Is that a good thing? Or
Yeah,
bad?
it was.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Well, now that we're in the Mutual Admiration Society, but we all know it. Gathering signatures is it's a task, but at the same time, it's a legitimate requirement. So
Right.
you gathered the signatures, and now you're on the ballot.
Right.
What are we talking about?
So it is a ballot question and not a town meeting vote, which is a big difference. So when I went in front of the selectmen, they understood that, I didn't need their approval per se because it's a vote at town meeting.
Well, also,
at
you're
town
independently
ballot.
elected.
Yes.
It's not. You're not under the purview of the Board of Selectmen.
Correct.
You're independently elected, and people can run.
So that's the interesting thing about this, because one of the questions that people had obviously is, what if I decided to just goof around and not show up to work? And well, they don't know me because I would never do that. But if that were the case, Section 19D puts the onus on the Board of Selectmen. They now have the right to remove me for cause if I become a tenured clerk. So it would change.
Interesting.
Yeah, it would change from a recall petition to a Board of Selectmen vote.
That sounds a little interesting.
Yeah.
To change the dynamic of, I suppose, who you're answerable to. But it's important in in any role to have that checks and balances. So what makes America a great country? You've got the three equal arms. And so for tenure, it's not really tenure for life. It's just changing the oversight, or not necessarily oversight, but the ability to change.
Right.
Well,
so what happens?
The selectmen would.
Yeah, if they would call a meeting and have a vote, if I was not doing my job, they would have a right to remove me, rather than as an elected clerk or any elected official, a recall petition would be the way to remove someone if they weren't doing their job. So in some ways it makes it a little easier for the removal process.
Yeah.
But you have to have that checks and balances, and the legislature realized that. But I think they also realize it's an important position. You need to have stability in the position. So to me, that's what this statute is all about.
That's exactly, and I didn't realize that this is the way the conversation was going to go, but I think that's one of the key pieces of the success of the town clerk's office, is that you do have that stability. Because, and again, I can't speak, maybe you can speak to the historical reasons why the town clerk is elected. I would imagine it's because it is independent of selectmen, and it has to be some sort of check and balance. It has to be the voters as the people who put you or whomever into that role. Because if you answered to the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Selectmen were doing something that was either unethical or outside the bounds of what you're supposed to have oversight of, that puts you in a tenuous position of having to oversee the people who oversee you. And that in itself is a check and balance.
Right. Yeah.
Pretty
cool.
cool.
Yeah, it is pretty cool. So traditionally, clerks were always elected up until around 1950. And at that point, it changed a little bit, and now they can become appointed. And there's about...
I was going to say, how many communities do that?
There's about 125 communities that have appointed clerks.
Really?
The majority of those are the cities. All of the city clerks are now appointed.
And they would be appointed by the city council.
Correct. Or the mayor, or what each charter may be a little bit different.
See, I look at that and I say to myself, okay, so what is the protection in there in case the town clerk in whatever this municipality is that appoints, maybe he says, we have these ethics statutes and you didn't follow these and I now need to investigate, and they can say, well, we'll just appoint somebody else.
There's that little pressure point, and
it's
I think
nice to depoliticize the town clerk's office, which I think is a key piece of this.
Yes, right. It's the stability and the depoliticization. So
interesting.
Yeah. So you've hit on that.
It's an interesting position you have. I suppose that's why yours is the only elected position that's paid.
Right.
In the town of Foxborough. Interesting. Yeah. I love talking politics. So okay, here we go.
So that but those are the reasons that I thought this might be the better approach rather than appointed, because the stability you can have from either perspective. But once you get into the whole politicalization of the office, I'm very proud of the fact that my staff and myself, very neutral on all of the issues, and I think you have to have that.
That's a very interesting thought, and I keep going back to your time as the interim town manager, where you clearly struggled at times with the responsibilities there, because I could see, because I watched the meetings, I watched the selectmen's meetings, and I could sense that you're trying to fill the one role, but you also knew, because selectmen by nature, and this is correct by the way, are a political branch, and they have opinions. People elect them to set policy and implement policy, and that doesn't always necessarily jive with the town clerk's role, which is to enforce the laws of the town and that are under your purview, and to process dog licenses, of course. But there's a little bit more to it than that, and so it's an interesting push-pull on you.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a...
But you survived.
I did survive, and it was interesting.
And you seem to have a very good working relationship with Bill Keegan, our town manager.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean, he's doing his job, and if he has questions for me, he asks me questions. Otherwise, he's doing his job. I don't need to be telling him how to run the town of Foxborough. He's got more than enough experience.
Great. So you like being town clerk?
I do. I love it. It's a great job. I love being up at town hall. There's a lot of activity. I've been involved in town government for 30 years.
You have
so,
been, yes.
I was on the AdCom. I was on the Board of Assessors, the moderator. So I love the town of Foxborough, and I'm just hopeful I can do a good job for the town.
Well, it seems as though the voters have agreed with you thus far, having three times elected you, in fact.
Correct.
And as the town clerk, I have full confidence in the office. So I suppose the question now comes down to May 4th. If folks believe that tenure is a good way to go, they will vote in favor at the elections. It's a ballot question, not a town meeting question. So it has nothing to do with the town charter. It has to do simply with a state statute. And this is an opportunity that is outlined in Mass General Law,
Chapter 41, Section 19B.
B, C, and D. I guess people can go to mass.gov and look it up themselves if they want. But there it is. It's going to be on the ballot, and so folks should make their voices heard. Tenure for our town clerk. And Bob Cutler, I wish you luck with that. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the good voters of Foxborough here on Foxborough Central?
As I say, just get out and vote. We like participation, and now's your chance to have your say. And you have earned that as being a resident of the town of Foxborough and a voter, so please get out and vote.
Strong message, and we know we'll see you out there at the polls on May 4th. And don't forget, after you vote, and you will vote, I'm sure, after you vote, to join us back here on Foxborough Cable Access for live election coverage. We'll do the count, and we'll report it to you. And if you missed any part of today's program, feel free to look us back up at www.fcatv.org. On behalf of all the volunteers at Foxborough Cable Access, Paul Beck behind the glass, Betty Travers and Deb Storrs behind the cameras, Lauren Batar, who puts this program on the air for you, and Jillian, who always makes sure that the graphics look right. I'm Bob Hickey, your host, thanking you. I hope you have a wonderful day, Foxborough. Take care.